I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. After much anticipation, the first Republican primary debate was finally held in Milwaukee without the party's leading candidate. But he was there, shall we say, in spirit. Today we'll discuss the debate and campaign strategies with two political experts. So how much did Trump and his absence loom over the proceedings? And how did the other candidates do? Stuart Stevens is a Republican political consultant, author, senior advisor to a moderate election PAC, the Lincoln Project. On Wednesday, he and Republican pundit Ann Coulter weighed in with New York Times journalist Frank Bruni on Trump's future, the Republican Party, and the presidential race overall. You can read their conversation at nytimes.com. Stuart, thank you for joining us. And what do you think of the debate? Did that debate change anything so far?
Well, I think it was probably one of Joe Biden's better debates. I think he had a good night. Debates like this, I've done prep for them a million times. It's very, very difficult for anything substantive to happen. You only have about 10 minutes to talk when you really look at it. I think it's very important to go into these debates as a candidate with a very clear-cut strategy of only a couple of things you want to accomplish. I don't think that these candidates did that. I think it was sort of a muddle. Probably Ron DeSantis hurt himself the most because he was in second place, more expectations. He's just not very good at this. And the more you see that, the more it's sort of disappointing to a lot of people who are trying to pump him up into being kind of the next big state Republican governor, like Reagan, Bush, Romney, who won the nomination. But all of those candidates, Sam, were positive candidates, optimistic, expansive. And DeSantis is an angry guy. And it comes across, and I don't think it's terribly appealing.
Your conversation colleague at nytimes.com, Ann Coulter, said that it would have been Ron DeSantis's to lose. Did he lose it? Did he gain any ground? And she also said that she thought Tim Scott would come out in second place in the polling after that debate. Did those predictions hold, do you think?
I don't. Well, Ann is a DeSantis fan. So there's sort of two ways to look at this, I think. If you are a DeSantis supporter entering that debate, did you leave a DeSantis supporter? I think he probably didn't lose that many votes, but I think the intensity of his vote went down. There's just not much there that you're going to, why should I be for this person? And look, I think Donald Trump had a good night. He clearly dominated the debate. The debate was about Donald Trump, not about really the future of America and how it affects most Americans. So, at the heart of this, Sam, is the Republican Party really does not have a coherent governing philosophy now. I mean, I worked in the party for almost 30 years, and if you held a gun to my head and said, tell me what it means to be an American Republican conservative today, I would just say, shoot me, I have no idea. Say what you will about Elizabeth Warren or something. She has a coherent theory of government. She can articulate it. She can defend it. You may love it, you may hate it, but you can have a conversation. And it will be a coherent conversation. There's really no Republican governing philosophy now, and that just becomes apparent when you have these exchanges.
Of course, does it matter in terms of the nomination and the election? You and Ann Coulter, neither Trump fans, but is Trump going to win the nomination, assuming nothing more catastrophic occurs between now, the nomination, and even the election? Are all these debates relatively meaningless? Is he going to be the nominee?
I think Donald Trump's going to be the nominee. And the reason Donald Trump is going to be the nominee is that he is closest to what the Republican Party wants to be now. There's this sort of desire or winsome feeling among a lot of us, call it establishment Republicans, which I would have been one, that the party will return to some, quote unquote normalcy. There's nothing to return to. Donald Trump is what the party wants to be, which is why Donald Trump is winning overwhelmingly. And he provides that with more energy and vividness and color than any other of these candidates.
What's wrong with that?
Well, I think what's wrong with it is that I think Donald Trump is running as an anti-democratic candidate. If you go back and read or watch his announcement in Waco in April, it's one of the more astonishing moments, I think, in American political history. It's really a guy announcing to run for president at war with the United States and democracy. It's the final battle, as he says. He's running for vindication. Yeah, he is a quite grievance candidate. And the tragedy here is that the Republican Party has embraced that. I wrote a book that's coming out in October called A Conspiracy to Kill America that talks about the elements that are always present when a democracy slides into autocracy. And they are present now. And I think that we have to wake up and look at this reality. Now, the problem with the unimaginable is it's hard to imagine. But we really, I know these people, I know them well, and as bad as you think they might be, they're worse. And I think that they really do have a very different vision of what this country should be.
Stuart, Donald Trump got elected once. He almost got reelected. So what does this say about not only the Republican Party, but about America?
It's a fascinating question. I've asked myself a lot. In the 1930s, when there was a huge fascist movement in America, why didn't America become fascist? Probably because FDR. I mean, if Lindbergh had been president, if Henry Ford. So what does that tell us? Maybe it tells us what we used to learn when we took civics classes, that leadership matters. And I think that Trump gave permission to people to be their worst self. And there's something about that that is very attractive. What is the compact between you and politics and a politician? If someone is, traditionally in America, it has been to ask you to be, you're appealing to your better angels, that we aspire to be something bigger and better. Trump changed that. Trump said that your worst self is really your true self, and you should embrace that. And that's very seductive. It's easy to be angry. It's easy to feel grievance. And once you embrace that, once a major party embraces that, which is what has happened now, it's very, very difficult to unwind.
How much of his support is undergirded by white racism, by fear of whites becoming a minority in this country? Although, of course, it depends how you define white and ever-changing construction.
Right, yeah. I think it's all about race. Look, 1956, Eisenhower got 39% of the African-American vote. In 64, when Goldwater was against the Civil Rights Act, that dropped to 7%. Okay, Trump got 8% of African-American. So you go up 1 point every 56 years. This is going to take a while. And the largest demographic that is declining the fastest are non-college educated white voters. It used to be 60%. Now it's under 40%. I mean, here's a statistic that always stuns me. Ronald Reagan, 1980, wins this sweeping landslide with 55% of the white vote. John McCain loses a not particularly close race with 58% of the white vote. And this is what Republicans realize, that they can't, all the Stephen Millers in the world can't change the demographics of the country. And America is headed to become a minority-majority country. And in some ways, we already have. Of Americans who are 15 years and younger, the majority are non-white. So the odds that they're going to be 18 and non-white look really, really good. And Republicans realize this. And there was a choice to be made. Either do what it was necessary to ask the hard questions to why are we not appealing to more non-white voters? Trump's coalition was 85% white in a country that's 60% white, and since we've been talking, less so. Or are you going to do everything to maximize that white vote and to make it more difficult for non-white voters to participate? And tragically, the party took that choice. And that's where we are now. And, when you look at what happened on January 6th, where did they not want to certify votes? Chicago, Atlanta, Philadelphia. What do these have in common? Well, they have a lot of African American votes. So I don't think we talk about this enough, Sam. What January 6th was really about was an extension, basically, of Jim Crow. You can stop these people from voting now, so you're going to disqualify them after they vote. So, you know, I get asked this question a lot by my old Republican friends. Okay, so you're telling me if I voted for Donald Trump, I'm a racist. So there's 73 million racists in the country, huh? Well, first of all, there probably are 73 million racists in the country, so let's don't pretend otherwise. But, you know, my answer to that is, it doesn't mean that you are a racist. It means that something is more important to you in a president than having a racist as president. Because you can't deny that Donald Trump is a racist in any kind of credibility. And I think that's a terrible reality. And Republicans this is going to change. I mean, my view is that there's about a 10-year period where we have to defend democracy. And if we can pass off what we were given in 10 years, I think we'll be okay. But I think this is a very, very dangerous time. And if Donald Trump wins, or Ron DeSantis, who's kind of a mini-me Donald Trump, I think it's going to be the last election that we can recognize as an election in America.
That's pretty depressing. Let me ask you a quick last question. A question that's totally unfair, and who knows what can happen when. What is likely to make a difference in this election, if anything?
Yeah, look, I think that Republicans are out of step with the country, as the Supreme Court is out of step with the country. So if you look at these cultural wars, if I ran the Democratic Party, I would wake up every day trying to get in a cultural war because Republicans are losing. Who won the Nike versus Donald Trump cultural war over Colin Kaepernick? Nike, they made $9 billion. Who won the cultural war over Disney? Disney won. I mean, Ron DeSantis got in a fight with the Happiness Company and lost. The majority of Americans don't want to embrace racism. You know, Donald Trump tried to make this whole appeal to suburban voters about, well, what if a non-white person moved into your neighborhood? I think overwhelmingly the majority of white families who are living in suburbs in America, if a non-white family moved next door, they want to show their kids that they're welcoming these people. I don't think that there is a part of our culture that embraces hate, that reinforces racism, except these elements on the internet. So I think it's sort of the basic decency of Americans that I think ultimately you have to bet on. And this is what Joe Biden means when he says the soul of America. And there's something exhausting about anger in our lives. Just anything is, you know, road rage is exhausting. If you feel that you've been cheated and you focus on it and think about it, it's exhausting. Mm-hmm. And Donald Trump is a candidate of anger, as is Ron DeSantis, as is a lot of people on the stage we saw last night. And, you know, part of the benefits of living in a civil democracy is not having to think about the government. You don't want to wake up and wonder what kind of mood is the president in today. Mm. That's what happens with Putin. Putin woke up in a bad mood yesterday, so he blew Prigozhin out of the sky. When Donald Trump was president, you had to think about Donald Trump all the time. And, you know, I don't think people like that. And one of the advantages that became about Joe Biden, they used to say Joe Biden's boring. All of a sudden, boring became good. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden was been, the Senate since he was like 17. All of a sudden, experience became good. Competence became good. And I think that calmness that is part of the current administration, the idea that professionals are doing their job and the economy is doing a lot better, I think that's reassuring to people.
I think it's a good point. People don't want politicians in their face anymore.
Yeah, you don't want to wake up thinking about, you want to live your life. That's what this whole idea of the American experiment was about.
Stuart Stevens, thank you so much for joining us from Washington. And coming up next, more debate reaction, thoughts on the evolving landscape of American politics. Our next guest has been writing about politics for decades, covering its intersection with American demographics and various other undercurrents that shape our elections. Thomas Edsall, the author of several books on politics, he contributes weekly to the New York Times opinion section. This week he contrasts the voter appeal of Governor Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. His conclusion, DeSantis just can't beat an incumbent like Donald Trump. Did the debate this week change anything as far as you're concerned, Tom?
Actually, I think it just confirmed more DeSantis's weakness. I was very surprised to see him basically go through the debate almost as like he wasn't there. He was like a dance partner that doesn't dance. He didn't engage the debate particularly. He didn't engage the issues that he normally does, and he seemed much more to be like a bystander, basically. And David Frum from The Atlantic, I noticed, tweeted that he thought that DeSantis had effectively conceded the election, and that may be going too far, but it did have this quality of a non-starter.
So does Donald Trump win the nomination? Obviously, it's a year away, and lots of things can happen, and they already have. But does anybody beat him in the Republican Party?
I don't think so. I just, none of those candidates who were on stage last night, I don't think I think he's unbeatable, basically.
And what about in November of 2024?
I think he's the best thing that can happen to the Democrats. Some of those people who were on the stage last night would be pretty good general election candidates, but they're not going to make it to the general. Donald Trump is the strongest in his party, but I think he has shown real weakness and is going to be even weaker come November 2024. And he will be Biden's saving grace in that sense.
Tom, you talk about a gut-level hatred in political life these days. Now, you're a historian. You go back to Civil War times. There were people caning each other in the Senate chamber. People in the early 20th century were being deported. In the 1950s, people were killing themselves because they were being smeared over communist allegations. Are things today worse than they've ever been before?
Well, I don't think they're worse than the Civil War period, the pre-Civil War period. That clearly, I think, was the top of the charts. But the big difference now is that the animosities between people have congealed into the two parties. The differences on religion, on family values, on women's rights. You take almost every issue, including tax, it runs the gamut. And you now have people on the left and right who are consistently on the left or consistently on the right. And that makes the adversarial quality of politics much more intense. Everything is at stake. That's why people talk about existential politics as if it's a life or death, the outcomes become life or death outcomes. It has taken on this quality. Political scientists have a phrase called affective polarization, where it's really more emotional than ideological. And I think that's the difference between now and previous times, except the Civil War. I think at that point, there's no question, things were divided worse than now.
And you've also written about what impact this has on people's perception of freedom of speech and how far it should be extended. This is something, obviously, President Trump has raised in his own defense. How far should we allow free speech, and should we be curbing it at all?
Well, as a newspaper guy, I am for free speech, kind of 100%. I'm a free speech kind of person in my own view. But there is a real debate over what speech should be free. And you see on the Republican side this claim that they're for freedom, but then they are for in many cases, book banning. There's Moms for Liberty group is very strong on the right, and then there's the attacks on different academic approaches to controversial issues, critical race theory being the most. And then on the other side, liberals, especially in academia, are having trouble with cancellation culture and the inability to speak centrist or conservative views on campus. And so both sides really have a free speech problem. My own view is ought to be just wide open, but I think I'm in the minority on both sides now.
I think you may be right. It's hard to
Yeah.
say any of those things anymore. You cited a recent study that talked about the evolution of the Democratic Party, a party not of labor anymore, but of socioeconomic elites, and the development of the Republican Party as a party not so much of business, but of working class social conservatives. What does that evolution portend for American politics?
Well, I think in the long run, it's a problem for the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has always claimed to be the party of the working man and woman of all races, colors, gender, so forth. Insofar as they are not the party of the working class, and they've lost huge ground among white working class, and now they're losing some ground among Black and Hispanic working class voters. That, I think, undermines the credibility of the Democratic Party as the voice of liberalism, if you want to put it that way. The Republican Party, though it has been unable to expand its representation of the working class into the economic arena. It's against raising the minimum wage, for example. Republicans are down on unions on the whole. There is a movement in the Republican Party, but it's more an intellectual movement than a substantive large voter body movement to try to move more in a pro-worker direction. But that has not really taken place. I think the real losers in this process are going to be workers of all races. They're going to have poor economic representation in the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party is going to be diverted more towards cultural issues that are not that relevant to the day-to-day life of someone who punches a time clock every day.
Very quickly, why is there such an overlay of race in politics when, as you know better than most, the definition of race has constantly evolved? We never thought of Italians, the Irish, even Jews as white at various points in our history, and most Hispanic Americans consider themselves as white Americans.
It's race has been an undercurrent in American politics from the word go. I mean, the four-fifths definition in the Constitution, the Civil War, the segregation and everything else since then, and the whole foundation of the Southern Democratic Party. We just have not gotten away from it. It's changed and evolved, but it's still race, 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 race. And my view is that that divide underlies and reinforces virtually every other divide. And it is, I don't know what to say. It's just one of those things that has just plagued American politics for the entire history of this country.
Thomas Edsall, thank you for joining us from Washington. And coming up next, I'll share some personal thoughts on whether time is running out for Donald Trump. Early in 2016, Donald Trump was so cocky about winning the Republican nomination that he boasted, quote, "I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters." Without shooting anyone, he retained or attracted enough voters to win the presidency. But in front of Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue, his company was defiantly killing time. New York's Department of Transportation collects millions of dollars annually from property owners in return for granting permission to place signs, lampposts, benches, bollards, just about anything else imaginable on or over or under the city's sidewalks. The fee varies widely. A 10-year permit for a standalone sidewalk clock, like the four-faced ornamental one in front of Trump Tower, typically costs $300 annually. That's assuming the property owner applied for a permit to install it. Mr. Trump did not. Or that city inspectors happened to notice the 16-foot clock that has stood sentinel in front of 725 Fifth Avenue for more than a decade. Apparently, they didn't. With 12,000 miles of sidewalks, of course, it's not surprising that some of the structures fall through the bureaucratic cracks. The city never bothered the Trump Organization about the clock until early in 2015, after the New York Times inquired about it. That May, the city finally ordered Mr. Trump's company to remove the clock within 30 days. The following October, the company's engineers formally applied for a permit. Give and take negotiations followed. Apparently, a permit was never approved. Once Mr. Trump was elected, security concerns apparently intruded. That perhaps explained the city's nonfeasance regarding the illegal concrete planters flanking Trump Tower. It doesn't explain the city's failure to enforce its threat to remove the clock. Last month, after the Times inquired again, city officials sent another letter warning the Trump Organization to remove the clock within 30 days or face a penalty. Alternatively, the company could apply again for a permit and complete the process by July 19, 2024, one day after the Republican National Convention, at which Mr. Trump hopes to be nominated, perhaps prompting the same security concerns that had postponed the enforcement process 7 years ago. The ornamental clock itself, festooned in gold, proclaiming its location as Trump Tower, is hardly at issue. It's what it says about what makes Mr. Trump tick and about how the bureaucracy works. Earlier this month, the Trump Organization began the application process all over again. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.